Before we start today's tale, picture this: the lonely creak of wood in a cabin, the desert wind clawing at the shutters, and a knock at the door that would change a man's life forever. If you enjoy stories of the Wild West, where silence hides scars, and every encounter could spark a legend, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop your thoughts in the comments. Who do you think knocks on that door? Your guesses make these stories even more alive. Now, let's ride into tonight's story. The cabin stood at the edge of nowhere, a squat figure of timber and stone resisting both storm and time. Inside, a man sat by the fire with only the popping of resin in the logs to keep him company. His name was Daniel Crane, though in town they whispered it in fragments: Crane, the quiet one, the gun who walked away. To most, he had disappeared years ago, swallowed by the wilderness, and that was exactly how he wanted it. His life was a cycle of silence: chop the wood, mend the roof, polish the rifle he no longer carried into town. The night pressed heavy, and Crane was just about to bank the fire when a sound came, sharp and strange, one he hadn't heard in years. A knock. 3 faint raps on his cabin door, almost swallowed by the wind. He froze, every instinct from his old life returning in a single heartbeat. No one came here, not by accident. Hand close to the iron revolver on the table, he stepped to the door and lifted the latch. The hinges groaned as if reluctant to invite change. Standing there was a young woman, her dress torn by brush, her face streaked with dust, clutching an empty tin canteen as if it were worth more than gold. Her lips were cracked, her breath ragged. She raised her eyes to his and whispered, "Water." For a long moment he said nothing, searching her face for deceit. In the borderlands, kindness could be bait. Yet her trembling hands and the near collapse of her frame left little room for pretense. Without a word, he took the canteen, stepped to the barrel by the door, and filled it. When he returned it, she drank greedily, then stopped herself, as though ashamed of her desperation. "Thank you," she murmured, voice hoarse but steady. I lost my way." Crane studied her, his silence more pressing than questions. She shifted under his gaze, then spoke again. "We were traveling west. My family. Bandits scattered us. I ran. I've been walking since morning." Her eyes glistened in the firelight. "I thought I'd die before I found anyone." The man's hand tightened on the doorframe. He knew that stretch of road, knew the kind of men who prowled it. He should have told her to keep moving, that his cabin wasn't a place for strays. Yet the words caught in his throat. The last thing he had expected tonight was a reminder of the world he had abandoned. "Inside," he said finally. Just one word, heavy as stone. She stepped in hesitantly, clutching her shawl around her. The cabin smelled of pine smoke and worn leather, its single room spare but orderly. A chair, a bed against the far wall, and a fire that painted everything in shades of amber. Crane fetched a blanket from the trunk and placed it near the fire. "You can rest there," he said, his voice rough from disuse. She lowered herself onto the floor, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. Her eyes softened. "You don't have to do this." "I know," he replied. That was all. The silence between them stretched, broken only by the crackle of the flames. She drew her knees close and stared at the fire, exhaustion tugging her eyelids. He sat in his chair, rifle propped close by, every line of his body rigid. It had been years since he had shared this room with another soul. He told himself he had allowed her in out of decency, nothing more. Yet as he watched her lean into the blanket, a quiet gratitude softening her face, something inside him stirred, an ache he thought long dead. Hours later, the cabin lay in stillness. She slept curled near the fire, her breathing steady at last. Crane lay awake on his cot, staring at the beams above him. Memories he had buried clawed their way to the surface, the gunfights that painted his hands in blood, the betrayal that drove him into solitude, the companions who had fallen one by one until only he remained. Solitude had become his shield, but tonight it felt like a cage. His eyes drifted back to the girl. In the fire's glow, she seemed less like a stranger and more like a reminder that not all had been lost, that not all who crossed his path brought death. For the first time in years, he wondered if fate had not finished with him after all. Then, just as sleep began to claim him, a sound slipped through the night. Hoofbeats. Distant, muffled, but unmistakable. He sat upright, every muscle taut. Riders on the trail, coming slow, the rhythm of pursuit. His gaze snapped to the door, then back to the girl by the fire. Her rest was deep, unaware. Crane's hand reached for the rifle at his side, fingers brushing the worn wood stock. The years of exile had not dulled his instincts. Trouble was out there. And he knew in his bones it was tied to the girl who had knocked on his door. The hoofbeats faded into silence, but the unease remained, coiling in his chest. He sat back down, rifle across his lap, eyes fixed on the door. Outside, the wind carried whispers through the pines, but inside, the cabin held its fragile peace. For now. And in that fragile peace, the gunslinger felt the first spark of something he had not known in years, a reason to guard more than his own life. Morning spilled across the clearing like a slow tide, gilding the cabin walls in soft amber. Daniel Crane was already awake, seated by the fire with tin mug in hand, when the woman stirred beneath the blanket. Her lashes fluttered, her eyes finding him with a moment of startled disorientation before recognition set in. The faintest smile touched her cracked lips. "I thought maybe it was a dream," she whispered. "You're still here," he replied simply. The scent of coffee drifted through the room, and she sat up, pulling the blanket closer. He poured her a cup and handed it over without ceremony. She took it, hands trembling slightly from exhaustion, but steadied by the warmth. For a while, they drank in silence, the quiet not heavy but alive with unspoken things. "What do I call you?" she asked finally. He hesitated. His name had become something he rarely gave. Still, the honesty in her eyes left no space for evasion. "Crane," he said. Her own name fell softly into the air, Eliza. It fit her, fragile yet resolute. A name that carried both grace and survival. Crane repeated it under his breath, not quite aware he had done so, and something shifted between them. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier. "We were heading west, looking for land to settle. My father thought it safer to travel with a small group. But smaller makes you easy prey. Bandits came at dusk. Shots, shouting. I ran. I don't know who made it." Her fingers tightened on the tin mug until her knuckles blanched. "I kept walking. I thought if I could just find water." Crane listened, his gaze fixed on the flames. He knew the kind of men she described, their cruelty, their hunger for power in places too wild for law. He had faced them once, long ago, before he buried his gun with his past. Yet something in her story awakened the part of him he had tried to silence, the part that couldn't stand by while innocence bled in the dust. "You're safe here," he said at last, though he wasn't sure if it was a promise or a vow to himself. Eliza nodded, tears glistening though she fought them back. To distract herself, she offered to help with chores. Crane almost refused, but when she rose to gather kindling, he let her. She moved through the small cabin with a quiet determination, and for the first time in years, it felt less like a hermit's refuge and more like a home. While she arranged the woodpile, she laughed softly at a splinter catching her finger. The sound startled him. It was light, unguarded, utterly foreign to the silence that had ruled his life. He found himself watching her, realizing with a jolt how much he had missed the sound of another human voice, the ripple of another presence altering the stillness of the day. He looked away quickly, but the echo of that laugh lingered in him. Then, just as the fragile warmth began to grow, the distant thunder of hoofbeats shattered it. Crane stiffened, his hand closing around the rifle at his side. Eliza froze, eyes wide with fear. "They found me," she whispered. Crane didn't ask how she knew, he saw it in the terror that gripped her. He moved to the doorway, rifle steady, his silhouette cut against the pale light. From the tree line, 3 riders emerged, their figures hard and predatory. They reined in their horses at the edge of the clearing, studying the cabin like wolves scenting prey. One of them called out, voice rough with arrogance. "We're looking for a girl. Passed this way last night." Crane said nothing. His silence was answer enough, though his rifle, leveled without tremor, spoke louder. The riders muttered among themselves, uneasy. They recognized the stance of a man who had killed before and would again. After a long, tense moment, the leader spat into the dirt and tugged his reins. "Ain't worth it. We'll find her trail elsewhere." They turned their horses, the thud of hooves retreating into the wilderness. Eliza sagged against the wall, relief and dread mingling on her face. "They'll be back," she whispered. Crane lowered the rifle but did not put it away. He knew she was right. Men like that didn't surrender a hunt so easily. He turned to her, his eyes steady. "Then they'll find me waiting." She shook her head. "I can't stay here. I'll only bring danger to you." Something fierce rose in him, cutting through years of self-imposed exile. "You brought more than danger," he said, voice low but resolute. "You brought me back to living. A cabin's no place for one man. Stay." Her lips parted, the words catching in her throat. A tear slipped free, not of sorrow but of release. She stepped closer, her hand brushing his, and in that touch lay a silent agreement. Neither spoke, but the air between them thrummed with a bond forged in necessity and something deeper neither had expected. That night, the stars burned like lanterns over the clearing. Eliza lay near the fire, her breathing calm at last. Crane sat at the window, rifle across his knees, eyes scanning the horizon. The solitude he once clung to felt distant, almost alien. Now he had something worth guarding, and for the first time in years, he welcomed the weight of that responsibility. In the hush of the wilderness, he knew the bandits would return. He also knew he would meet them head-on, not for vengeance, not for survival alone, but for her. She had knocked on his door asking for water, and in answering, he had found the only love he would ever know. The night deepened, and in its stillness, Daniel Crane allowed himself the smallest of smiles, grim, unyielding, but real. The man who once sought only to disappear now had a reason to fight, and heaven help those who tried to take it from him.